Welcome to the Zeducation podcast, where it's all about helping people and organizations unleash their greatness. Hosted by me, Pasitaua Haufano, and my brother.
That's me, Kalolo Haufano.
The Zeducation podcast features lively discussions.
When they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered.
My heart, it's full of pride for me to be at Maitai Samoa.
As well as tips on leadership and business by some of the top minds and influencers around the world.
You don't necessarily need a degree these days. There's so many pathways to success.
Welcome to the Zeducation podcast.
So welcome to our Zeducation podcast, another session for us to share some pertinent and very important topics that relate to workplace upskilling. And I think the topic that we're going to be talking about today is going to be very valuable and it's very relevant as well.
Yeah, on this episode, we're going to talk about the recession and how it's impacting businesses and why businesses should still prioritize training their staff even during a recession. You know, a lot of businesses think about laying off staff, cutting down costs. I think L&D or training your people is one of the first things that they cut down as well. And people are talking about they can't afford training. We get it, we understand. But we're going to talk about the flip side of that, why you can't afford not to train your staff during the recession. So, it's going to be an interesting episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to build up this conversation, the first thing I think needs to be laid is what is a recession in essence. Economics 101, what drives an economy is supply and demand. And when you're going through an economic boom where everything's going well, demand is very high and supply is low. So a lot of businesses are trying to achieve that. Whereas during a recession, demand is low and supply is very high. So that's why a lot of people get laid off because there's too much supply. But with the recent hike, 0.25 points, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand hiked up the OCR, which now leaves us at 5.5 points or 5.5%. Not to say that this is the number one or the most important factor of hiking your OCR up to drive a recession, but in real practical terms, it does in my eyes. For example, when you increase the OCR, it also increases the interest rates and it cools the economy because RBNZ is there to reduce inflation or maintain inflation. So therefore, when you're increasing the OCR or the interest rate, the mother of all interest rates, there's going to be less activity or demand. It cools the demand out and a lot more people tend to save money because the interest rates are high. And because of that, it also leads, if it goes too far out with the cost of living prices, etc., you can tend to go down a recession route. And I think it's a big topic of discussion here in New Zealand today.
Yeah, and just for those who don't understand OCL, the official cash rate.
What is those?
Let's simplify it a little bit for those who are listening on this podcast. So obviously, just to keep it real simple, so a normal person can go to a bank and take a loan and there's interest rates on that, right? So when you borrow money, you pay back interest on that, okay? Well, banks, they borrow money too from a central bank. So it's the same principle. So you got all these banks like the ones that you can think of, like Westpac, ANZ, BNZ, and all of that. They might go to a central bank here in New Zealand, borrow money, and that central bank puts interest rates on that. Okay, so who takes the hit? The banks do, right? And so if their interest rates are going up for them, then it just makes sense that they lift the interest rates on the money that's borrowed from normal people like ourselves as well. So there's this ripple effect that happens, okay? And people don't see that side of it. So when the official cash rate goes up, the interest rates, so does everything else basically. Borrowing money for your mortgage and that gets a little bit more expensive.
Yes.
So how does that affect businesses and your normal everyday, not everyday, but your normal employee?
It's a domino effect, right? When you have less people spending money, they're not buying products and services. And when you're not buying products and services, businesses are like, we don't have much customers buying our stuff. And then they go to their profit and loss or their financials and say, okay, what are the expenses that we're going to start cutting down? And that's what leads to recession, because one of the big things they look at is how many headcounts do we have? We might have to let go of people and look at some other quote unquote luxury overheads that they need to cut in order to make sure that they go through the storms of a recession. So it's very important for us to think about that, because for budgets, when businesses look at budgets, one of the first things they look at is learning and development, or L&D budgets. They say, oh, we're spending too much on this luxury overhead of training and upskilling our staff. Let's cut that. And it's become such a stereotype globally out there that learning and development is the first thing that they cut.
Yeah, it is. And I think before we get even further into that, just to highlight the other impact of the recession as well, or people losing their jobs is one of the first things to go. They cut off contractors, because that's the easy one. They're not full-time employees. They can just end it like that, as long as it's not discrimination or anything like that. But they can just let them go, contractors. Yeah. But I think you think about the recession. Inflation is also driving that. The cost of everyday goods going up, like food and that, and people are spending less money on luxury items like technology, laptops, phones, and that. And it's no surprise that the tech sectors is one of the first industries that get impacted first. You see, recently a lot of people in Salesforce, Microsoft, all over, tech industries, one of the first ones that get hit, because there's people buying technology, because the cost of everyday goods is more expensive now. So you got all of these things that they're working in. Yes, the recession is a tough time for a lot of businesses. It's a tough time for a lot of staff, especially losing your job. It's a scary time, especially if you depend on that job to provide for your family. And you're paying rent or whatever it is. It's a scary time, and it's a level of uncertainty. Like, people get scared, like, am I going to lose my job? So those are all those things that we have to take into consideration, that employers themselves are having to deal with as well, and as well as their staff. But I think, coming back to what you said earlier, Kalolo, around L&D is one of the first things that get cut. Absolutely, for them it makes sense. Like, we need our, and it's not so much just about budgets. It's also about time. It's like we need our staff to work more. We need production to be up. We need we're laying off a lot of staff, so your work is going to double.
Which is yeah, it's such a counterculture, right? Like, you're trying to reduce learning and development. But at the same time, you want them to be much more productive. But for them to be much more productive, if there are literacy, numeracy issues there still needs to be a level of upskilling. And I want to pinpoint too, COVID-19 really helped a lot of businesses understand that learning and development is so crucial. And it's also driven largely by digital transformation, because there's no doubt that a lot of businesses see that they're moving into tech, because if you don't use tech to provide more efficiencies in your business, you're falling behind. We're in the fourth industrial revolution, mate. So businesses start to realize that L&D is a very important cost that will provide return on investment, not just for productivity, but for their staff.
Yeah, digital transformation is very important. There's a lot more smarter, faster, and effective ways using technology to improve processes and productivity. But you still need to upskill your staff to use the technology. So they need to go hand in hand. So even though technology you're introducing into your business, what about the users of the technology as well? So we've got to keep that, take that into consideration. And we're also seeing a huge trend in the education space, where a lot of people are getting trained up, or the tech sector is looking for more people, which is quite interesting, because you're seeing the tech industry being impacted and laying off a lot of roles, but yet, on the flip side, they're still trying to bring in more and skill up more people in the tech sector, or bring them into the tech sector, which is quite interesting. But, you think about training and development, like, should businesses, consider training their staff even during a recession? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I want to firstly, before I share my sentiments to that, just go straight to stats. Like, LinkedIn did a survey in 2023 recently, and they said that 92% of businesses that were surveyed are optimistic in their learning and development money that they put towards their businesses. Nearly half have retained or increased their learning budgets despite financial difficulties. You wish there could be more than just 50%, but these stats are quite evident that businesses are focusing and will continue to focus on prioritizing learning and development in their staff, amongst their staff. Secondly, so my personal thoughts is definitely, I am a really strong believer that those that do cut it, a lot of those, not all of them, but many of them cut it because they're so reactive and don't have a learning and development strategy in place. Because as you know, when you have any type of strategy that leads towards the overall vision and mission of the organization, you forecast during a recession on how you would mitigate these risks. But all too often, many organizations may figure out a ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. Oh, we have these issues, let's go ahead and upskill them because these issues are today. Well, what about in 3 to 5 years, right? Like that's a proper strategy. You've got to forecast on what the trends are and how you're going to make sure that your staff are upskilling and identifying those skill gaps.
Yeah, and that's an example of businesses who are forward-thinking. Like forward-thinking businesses think 3-5 years in terms of training their staff. But they're also prepared for the ups and downs of the economy. But, I think, coming back to the question, should you train your staff during a recession? And I think it depends. It depends. Every business is different. The impact of the recession on every business is different. But I think there are 3 questions you really need to ask yourself. One, is it essential that we train our staff? And you're only going to know the answer if you got problems. You know the problems and you know how they're impacting productivity and efficiency directly. You would know. Second, the training that my staff would do, is it practical? Is it something that they can get trained on and apply straight away or quickly, at least, so we can get results faster, improve productivity faster? And the last question is, will this training improve productivity? If it's a yes or 3, then definitely. You should definitely train your staff. Recession or not recession, it's you should train your staff based on those questions. So I think it will take a bit of analysis as well, and also understanding your goals, objectives as a business. Where do you want to go? But I think, yes, I totally understand. During a recession, we've got to cut costs somewhere, right? We can't keep affording to burn operational costs at this rate when revenue and services are dropping. People are just buying less during a recession. There's less money flowing through the economy. And so those are things we've got to take into consideration, and we understand that. But I think it just forces businesses to prioritize quality training. So you might not have, 10 or 200 people go through training, but it might be the 3 or 4 or 5 or the top 100 that need that quality training to make up for the staff who have left, and roles are being merged and that kind of stuff. Processes are being merged or refined. So those are things to take into consideration.
Yeah, and to take that conversation further, it's a learning and development mapping over a period of many years, right? Because you might look at your current financial year and say, okay, these are our current existing problems. That's going to impact our productivity, because at the end of the day, productivity is reflected in the profit and loss for a lot of businesses. They look, how much profit had I made? Well, a profit and loss is essentially just accumulation of money you've made and spent in 1 year. But seeing the learning and development in the long-term gain to see how staff are increasing, and also how that'll increase their business and the productivity forecasted over a period of years. Secondly, on top of that is these humans, we're in an age of lifelong learning. And when they refer to that as a discourse, you're talking about, well, how are we going to continue to upskill them? How can this assistant manager get to a manager and therefore a general manager over 3, 4, 5 years? That's how businesses should start thinking, because not only are they upskilling their staff, they're also promoting their staff over time.
Yeah. And I think it's a good conversation to start leading into practical ways that employers can introduce or sustain training and development of their staff even during a recession. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit. What can employers do? And I think my first point I would probably say is yes, we understand that sometimes you have to lay off staff, and it is what it is. It's hard, but sometimes those decisions need to be made. And then so after that, you need to start thinking, how do we be efficient with the resources that we do have? How do we still keep productivity high, efficiency high, with the limited resources that now we have, like money and people and time. So I think you need to start looking at things like when it comes to your people, especially during that time of uncertainty, as goals. Like being efficient, like making sure that they're on the same page. Is clarity between what they're doing, their tasks, and the goals as well, and the mission of the business. And so if you've got 5 people in your team and they're all working on different things, but it's not really going towards the ultimate goal, then you maybe need to hit the pause button there and get the team on the same page, so that all the efforts, their time, and that are actually working towards achieving specific goals. Otherwise, everyone's just doing work, and it's not really improving the business outcomes. Look at the processes in your business. Is there, can we cut down on some of our meetings, make it more efficient? Can we get rid of some of this in terms of making decisions as a team? Can we make it more faster? Maybe instead of going through 2 or 3 people to get the sign off, can we do it quicker? So looking for more ways to be efficient and achieving clarity with your staff during that time. So it might be a level of discovering what you need and then upskilling and supporting where it's needed. That's what I would say is one of the first things during a recession.
On top of what you just shared, Pasi, I think the second thing or a practical thing businesses can do is, alluding to your first point, figure out what the problems are, and then see what the educational outcomes or the skills that need to come from it, and think practically on how are you going to measure it. For example, you might have an issue with wastage in your production line. Well, what's the learning objectives that you need to add into an upskilling program to help target that? And then how do you measure that? So after you upskill staff, you can see that there is a return on investment by seeing the wastage percentage go down. So businesses need to start realizing that these programs that are built for them, or they can use an off-the-shelf program that already works, figuring out how that provides a proper return on investment on their problems.
Yeah, and that requires clarity. Obviously, if you're a business and you have no idea what the productivity outputs or how you measure that, then you're in trouble. So you should already know right from the get-go as a business how to measure productivity. Now it's just a matter of what you need to train them on to improve their productivity, and figuring out a way to measure that so you know whether it goes up or down. And so I think regardless whether there's a recession or no recession, you still need to understand ROI and measure ROI on any training program. But I think it becomes even more of a priority during a recession, which is a great point. I think one of the other things I think about is obviously money. People get really tight on money. Businesses get tight on money when there's a recession. They're quite stingy on what they invest and spend on now. You're like, what's the ROI on this if I spend money here or hire this person here or upskill this stuff? I think one thing to take into consideration, any employer listening to this podcast, is there's funding and stuff out there, right? And yes, I understand sometimes we don't even know where to look to see if there's any funding for training and development, but it's out there, I promise you. The government's got money there. That's part of their job as a government, is to invest in GDP, with GDP productivity, and output of the economy, which comes mostly from businesses and people being employed. So of course they're going to invest money in upskilling and overall productivity for the economy. So there's funding that's always available. If you don't know where to look, I would recommend reaching out to training providers.
Absolutely.
Because that's the training provider's job. Like they will know. Their business depends, a lot of them depend on funding. And so they would know where to get the funding that will help support or resource your training programs. And so find a training provider. Even if you go on Google, type in workplace training providers or whatever it is, there's going to be people there that will know. Give them a call. Ask them the questions. Hey, I want training for my staff. Do you have resource, funding, or thing that we could tap into? They should be able to help. So if you don't know where to look, reach out to a training provider. And I'm just letting you know, I know that we get tight on money during a recession, but just know that there's money out there. There always is for training and development.
Yeah, I totally agree. And don't think of educational providers as a mutually exclusive, let's just sit there and they're going to be your education arm and they're not part of you. No, consider them as an integrated part to your solution. And we've worked with many clients, some of New Zealand's biggest businesses that consider us as an integrated education arm to them to help achieve those learning and objectives. We have over 10 facilitators that are already expertise in their field and can go in and really have years of experience teaching people in frontline and all the other work that we do as well. So because we are a niche and we specialize in that, don't be afraid to reach out to providers 100%.
And I will say, we talked about money as one of the constraints. We talked about, making sure you get quality training by measuring ROI and that the training is actually improving productivity for your business. The other resource that people get quite tight on is time. And we hear this all the time, even without a recession. It's like, oh, we're so busy. Or maybe after the financial year that we will think about it, the training for our staff. We need to do this first, or whatever it is. We need to finish the financial year so we won't worry about training for another 3, 4, 5 months until we finish this financial year. We get it. We get it. Time. But the best clients that we work with a lot of clients. And they say this time and time again, especially at graduations when they stand up and a supervisor, team leader, general manager, whoever it is gets up and they give their speech. A lot of them say this in common. They say, you know what, team? We're in a busy time right now and taking time off work and production is a huge ask for us, especially when we've got KPIs and objectives to meet. And actually some businesses are behind as well. But we know how important training is. And we're still going to fit it in because there isn't really a perfect time. You've got to make time for training. So, if you got employers, big employers like that, we're working with giants in some of these industries. And you've got leaders who say, we're so busy, we've got objectives and we might not meet them. So, but they still make time for their staff to get trained. And I think it's there has to be a balance, I agree. But you can tell that those staff, those businesses, you never take away busyness. There's always busyness, there's always goals, but they always make time because they know how important it is. And in the long term, it does reap benefits for the business.
Yeah. And that's the ultimate return on investment. Invest time in upskilling your staff and you'll see a lot of that productivity come back. I wanted to end off by sharing a story. One of our clients that we worked with about 1.5 years ago came to us with a problem. They wanted to embed in technologies to provide efficiency in their business. And they had staff members with low literacy and numeracy skills that they were so concerned that these tech tools would be a bit too much for them. So here they did, reached out to Zeducation, and we said, we're here to serve and we're happy to help you. In a nutshell, we trained up all their staff on digital literacy, helped them understand how to utilize the tech tools that they have embedded, such as a payroll tool and also a time management tool that they embedded. And they had saw a massive return on investment to the point where a lot of the staff had now become permanent from casual. And they had reshuffled the scheduling calendar because they were much more efficient. And it really goes to show that we upskilled them on digital literacy programs, even through the struggles that they had just recently, and obviously with the economic downturn or the forecasting economic downturn, yet they prioritize their staff, and their staff are providing much more productivity. And now we're in conversations with this client on what that looks like over a period of 3 to 5 years, on how they can embed lifelong learning, upskilling in their business for years to come. And that is a quintessential example of an organization that has embedded in or wants to embed in a strategy that regardless of the ups and downs of the economy, that's what is still anchored is their staff. And educating them with mātauranga that's going to help them fulfill not only their jobs, but their lives at home as well in their communities. So yeah, that's just one of many successful stories that we're seeing from Zeducation, and that's why we're here in this business in the first place.
Yeah, and that's a great example of a forward-thinking business and a business who understands that it's hard to take staff or take time to train up staff, but they still make it happen, because not only will it help them improve their jobs, but improve their lives. And so I think that's a good way to wrap up the podcast. And just remember, recession is a hard time, but training your people becomes even more important during this time. Clarity, quality, efficiency, productivity, all of that you can improve and grow through your people when it comes to training. So thank you for joining our podcast, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us.
Yeah, keep swimming, guys.